Hey there. Now, here's a question for you. Can we make a ninja game like Ninja Gaiden in NESmaker? Of course we can. Let me show you how. Okay, so first let me just show you an example game. So this is a very simple game. I'm just gonna show you just how this works in a very simple way. So it's this ninja game. Now this guy can run, he can jump. So far so good, right? This is nothing new. But when he attacks, he swings his sword. So if I run and then attack, then he stops. Like that. But what if I jump and attack in the air? Okay, let me try that. So when I attack in the air, he doesn't stop, but he still swings his sword. Now, what we're talking about here is melee combat. It's no problem to make a NESmaker game where you can walk around and shoot. In fact, that's the default Metroidvania module setup. You can walk around and you can shoot, no problem. There's a default NESmaker input script for that. But if we want to have a sword or something like that, where we can do melee combat, like this ninja guy, then things get a little more complicated. We can't do that right out of the box. So let me show you another test game here. Let's think about this. We have this little player guy. He's an object, right? Well, the weapon also needs to be an object. So let's think about this. When we attack, we create an object. Oh, well, this should be easy, right? We just create an object where the player is, and maybe change his action step to an attack action step. Well, I did that here in this test game. Let's see what that looks like. And this test game is very simple, and the input script is just something that I modified from the Metroidvania input script, where instead of shooting something, I'm just creating an object where the player is. So here's a little guy, he has a sword. What happens if I attack? Doesn't look so great. This isn't exactly what I wanted. I'm just creating an object where the player is. And by the way, except for the input script, this is default NESmaker setup. So this doesn't work. I can't just create an object where the player is, because like for example, if he's jumping, then the sword just gets left behind, and also the sword doesn't appear in front of him where we would expect it to be. So this doesn't work. We need something a little more advanced than this. So let me close the two test games here. Like that. And let's take a look at this. So we have our player object, and we have this weapon object. Now, the thing is, we need to make sure that these two objects appear in the game as if they are one. We don't want this sword, like we saw, to just be somewhere else. We need it to look like this, where it appears that sword, that the player is holding this sword, even if he's jumping. And this needs to be, very precise. We don't want the sword to lag a few pixels behind him. We want it to be we want this to appear as one thing. The player and the sword, they're one thing moving around. Even if it's jumping, even if the screen is scrolling, they need to appear together like this all the time. So, two things are true from what I said about the previous test game. We do need to create an object, more or less where the player is. But we can't create it like we saw exactly where he is. Because if we're creating a sword exactly where the player is, it's going to appear behind him. We don't want that. We want to, if it's facing right, then the sword needs to appear on the right side of the player. If it's facing left, then it needs to appear on the left side. Also, when the player is jumping, we need to make sure that the position of the sword object updates with the position of the player. So when it's jumping through the air, the sword follows along. So to make this easier, I made a new module for this, because there are several things that has to work in the background, for this to work like it should. And I call this the melee combat module. So this is a module that I made based on the Metrovania module. So it's a side-scrolling game where you can use melee combat. So here in the NESmaker forum, there's a brief description of how it works, how you set it up, and then you just download the module itself here. So let's do a little test game. Let's set things up so you can see how this works. Okay, so here I have downloaded the module and I've unzipped it. So now I have this folder called Melee Combat Module. Here I have a fresh install of NESmaker. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into this folder. I'm going to open my NESmaker folder. So the way I do things when I install it is just copy this file, melee combat base 459.mod. I'm going to copy that file, and over at my NESmaker folder I'm going to go into the modules folder, and in here I'm just going to paste in the melee combat mod file. Then in my NESmaker folder I'm going to go to game engine data, routines, base 45 and game. So here in the zip file or the folder that I downloaded, I'm just going to copy this folder called mod melee combat. So I'm going to copy that folder, and over here in my game engine data routines base 45 game folder, here I'm going to paste the mod folder with the other folders here. So now I have a new mod folder called melee combat. So that's it. Now I have installed this new module. Okay, so I have started to set up a test game here. So just to save some time, I'm not going to draw any graphics, and I'm not going to set up a level. I've already done that. But I want to do the things that are important for this melee thing to work. So here I have the player object. Now, I have not set up the player object yet, so let me do that now. So this guy is 2x2, and let's just set up these animation types. We have idle, we have walk, we have jump, and for this game I also included climb. So just add a climb. Whoops. But now this is the important one. I need one called attack. I guess I could add a hurt one as well. Alright, so this is persistent player, nothing special. Gonna give him 3 health. I'm gonna stop him when he collides with a solid object. Gonna give him a speed of 16, acceleration speed 255, 70 jump strength. So far nothing special except this animation type called attack. Except for that, I'll just set up the player in the normal way. But here in my action steps, just to make sure that everything works as it should, I'm going to set... Normally you don't need to set any action for the idle state. Like in a Metrovania game, you don't need to set an action here. But I'm going to set stop moving here. Just set 1 for that. Now, there are several reasons for that. One of the reasons is that if the player gets hit and he gets some knockback, when he gets back to his idle state, I want him to stop. So he gets some knockback, and that goes on for maybe a second or two, but after that, when he's back to idle, I want him to stop. Don't want him to continue with the knockback. Yeah, so that's one of the reasons I just have stopped moving here. Also, let's just set up this as normal. I'm gonna set up for action step 1, the walk action step, animation speed 3. Again, this is just normal stuff. Action step 2, that's jump. I don't need to set up anything there. Action step 3, that's climb. I'm gonna set ignore gravity. Now, again, really nothing special. But action step 4. Action step 4. That's the one I've dedicated for the attack action step. So you need to make sure that action step 4 is the attack action step for the player. So animation type, I'm going to set that to attack. And it's going to attack for 1 on the timer. Now, I could have done this another way. I could have made some sort of swinging animation or whatever. And in that case, it would probably have been best to say at the end of the animation, go to first or something like that. But this guy has just got 1 frame for his attack. So I'm just going to use an action step for this. Now, I want him to stop moving when I'm attacking. So I'm going to choose stop moving for the attack action step. Stop moving, and that's going to go on for 1 time unit. At the end of the action, I go to first. So I just attack, and then I go back to the idle state. So, yeah. And of course we have hurt, so I could set something like this up for hurt. Yeah. Alright, now let's just quickly set up some animations here. Idle right. And then we have idle left. We have walk right. We have walk left. Now these are just the normal animation types that you would make in any Metrovania game. But now comes the special one for the melee. We need to make an attack right animation. We need to have an attack left animation. I guess I could include climb here as well. And yeah, let's just do hurt right and hurt left. Okay, so idle right, let's just do this really quickly now. Oh, this is standard stuff, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'm just going to set up the normal stuff really quickly. So just give him a walk animation, jump animation, and here we go, attack. So this is what he's going to look like when he's attacking. It's a little dark. Okay, this is what the player is going to look like when he's attacking right. So I just copy that, attack left, and I flip the frame. So now I have an animation for attacking right and attacking left. Yeah, we don't need to set up the climb and hurt. Alright, so here object details. Idle right, idle left, walk right, walk left, jump right, jump left. Yeah, climb, we don't need to set up that, but attack right, attack left. All right. And we already set up the attack action step here, and it says attack up here. Okay, so let me just set a bounding box for this guy like that. Okay, save. Now we have the player object in place. Now he's missing some animations for climbing and hurt, but that's okay. So now that's the player object. Now I need to set up the weapon object. I'm just gonna do this really simple. So I'm just gonna use this little sword here. This tiny little sword. I need to give this sword an animation called right, or you don't have to call it right, but it makes more sense to do it that way. And I'm gonna give an animation called left. Okay, so this is right. Copy that and paste it to left, and then just flip the frame. Okay, so now I'm going to go to object details. For the left, when the sword is facing left, it needs to have the left animation. All right. So this is the player weapon. You need to make sure to check player weapon for this. Actions, I need to check ignore gravity for this sword. We don't want this sword to observe gravity. We don't, like we saw in the example game, in the previous example game, we don't want this sword to fall down on the ground. So ignore gravity, very important. Also very important. Now, do you remember when you set up the player object? When he's attacking, he's going to have that action step for 1 time unit. So I need to set 1 for the timer, the sword as well. It needs to correspond perfectly with the attack action step of the player. Now it doesn't have to do anything here, but it has to be set up at 1 here. And at the end of the action, the sword is not doing anything, but it's not doing it's doing nothing for 1 time unit. After it's finished doing nothing, we need to destroy it. So basically, this sword is just going to appear next to the player, and it's going to appear just as long as the player is stretching out his arm. When it's done, we destroy the sword, and the player goes back to his idle state. So effectively, this is going to make it look like he's stabbing his sword. So this timer needs to correspond perfectly with the action step of the action step 4 of the player for this sword. When it's done, end action, destroy me. Also, don't forget to set ignore gravity. But it also needs a bounding box. Now this is a very small sword, so I'm just gonna give it a tiny bounding box like that. And save. So we set up the player, set up the weapon, player weapon. Next, we need to use we need to import some input scripts. And we need to use the input scripts that I have provided with the module. So if I go to melee combat, go to inputs, here are some input scripts specifically made for this module. So I'm just going to include all of these like that. Then I'm going to go to input editor. For the main game, when I hold right, I am going to move right melee combat. Release, stop moving. Same thing for left. When I hold left, I move left. When I release left, I stop moving. Yeah, I'm not gonna set up climbing, the climbing action step. But when I press the A button, I'm going to jump like that. And when I release the A button, I'm going to do a variable jump. And the most important thing for this module, when I press the B button, I'm going to attack. This new script called, the new input script called attack. Like that. Okay. And there's the player. Okay, hopefully I've set up enough action steps and animations and input scripts, so I think this is going to work. So I'm just going to test this game now. Oh, I can actually see I'm missing one thing, but anyway, let's just see if this works. Alright. Okay, there we go. Alright, so... Okay, the inputs, oh, this is the... Alright, fine. Just gonna quickly set up the inputs here. Like that. And do it like that. Sorry about this. And let's just do it like that. Okay. So here we go. Our player is moving. We can jump. Again, nothing special. But what if I attack now? Yeah, look at that. That's what I wanted. I wanted the sword to appear in front of the player. Okay. So there's one more thing I need to show you here. If I go to project settings, user constants, I made a few new constants for this. So right now, the way this module is set up, you need to specify here in user constants the width of the player in pixels, the width of the weapon, again in pixels, and then what game object the weapon is. Now by default it's set to 1, which already says melee here in NESmaker, so that should work out great, unless you want one of the other ones there. And I also made a constant called monster death object. Now by default it's set to 9, so that's this. So here I would have to say monster death, and I could make some sort of monster death animation, and there's a code for creating this specific object when you defeat the monster. So that's the last thing there. But let me also just show you how I make the the object follow the player. That's happening in project settings, script settings. Go all the way down here to do draw sprites. That's where the code is that handles, making the sword follow the player wherever he goes. So let's take a quick look at that script. So here in the do draw sprites script, I have something here. Set player weapon position. So this do draw sprite scripts, when the game is running, all the active objects get their own turn through this script if they're supposed to be drawn to the screen. So when it goes through, it checks, is this the player weapon object? Well, if it is, then we go further here. Is that object active? Okay, if it is, then we go further. Then we check for the player 1 object. Is he in action step 4? Well, if he is, then we continue on here and we check what direction the player is in. Based on if he's facing left or right, we add the offsets, the correct offsets. So, for example, if the player is facing right, we add the offset, which is the player width, because we want the sword or the weapon to appear on the right side of the player. If he's facing left, we add the weapon width, so we subtract the width of the weapon from the player's X position. And then we just get the player's Y position. Here is an offset, so if you need to set an offset for the Y position of the player, you can do that here. I've set it to 8 by default here. And we get the player's direction. And here I'm updating the weapon's position and what screen it's on and direction. I'm updating all of those things for the sword, so they will match the player perfectly. And that happens here in the do draw sprite scripts. Now, if I made some sort of extra script, let's say I made some sort of action type script for the sword that says follow the player, whatever, that would be too slow. That would make the sword lag behind the player. But if I do this in the do draw sprites script, then I make sure that I sync up these things perfectly, so the sword follows the player perfectly. Alright. And let's just take a quick look at the attack input script. Now I'm checking if the input script starts by checking if the player is in his attack state, because if we're mashing the B button, we don't want things to crash. So if we are already attacking, we can't attack again. Also, we can't attack if we're in action step 7, the hurt action step. But if we are not in any of those action steps, then we change the action step to action step 4. We check the direction, and we do the same thing we saw in the do draw sprites script. We're adding the left or right offsets based on what direction the player is facing. And we're adding this offset again. I should probably have made this a constant, but I didn't do that. So anyway, here we're creating the weapon object itself in the input script. And based on whatever you set up in the user constants, that's the object we're creating. So that's what's happening there. So yeah, that's it. That's how this melee combat module works. Now, I have to say that this isn't perfect. You may run into issues. I know, for example, that sometimes when you jump and attack, it can seem like he's lagging in the air. So there are a lot of fine adjustments that could be made, or I'm sure there are several potential problems here. But I feel that at least this is a step in the right direction, where people can play around with melee combat in NESmaker. So again, it's not perfect, but hopefully you'll have some fun with this. So that's it for now. Enjoy this new module, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.